The Arab executive's child cried non-stop in the hospital, until an African woman said something that left him speechless. The beeping of machines filled the sterile hospital room as one of the wealthiest Arab executives in Dubai sat helpless beside his child's bed. For all his power, for all his money, there was nothing he could do to stop the tears streaming down the little one's face. Doctors rushed in and out, nurses tried everything, yet the child cried without rest. His empire meant nothing in that moment. He was just a father watching his world crumble in front of him. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a woman from Africa, a stranger with nothing to gain, stepped forward. What she said to him in that hospital room shattered the walls he had built around himself. It wasn't medical advice, it wasn't business strategy, it was something deeper, something that would change him forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more powerful and emotional stories that reveal the humanity hidden behind wealth and power. Stay with us, because what happened next will leave you questioning the true meaning of strength, love, and courage. The glass walls of Dubai's most luxurious hospital reflected the city lights like diamonds scattered across the desert night. Outside, the skyline glowed with towers of steel and ambition, monuments to wealth and power. Inside, however, one man's empire felt meaningless. Omar Al-Farid, a billionaire executive whose decisions shaped markets across continents, sat hunched in a simple plastic chair beside a hospital bed. His son, Amir, no older than 5, lay restless beneath crisp white sheets. The boy's small body twisted, his face red from endless tears. The crying had gone on for hours, piercing through the sterile halls, drawing glances of pity from nurses and frustration from doctors who could not seem to soothe him. Omar's hand, strong enough to sign contracts worth billions, trembled as he reached for his son's tiny fingers. "Please, Amir, just rest," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way no boardroom had ever witnessed. He had faced hostile takeovers, government crackdowns, even death threats. Yet nothing had ever stripped him bare the way this moment did. Watching his child suffer while his wealth, his influence, his very identity as a powerful man, meant absolutely nothing. A doctor entered the room, adjusting his glasses nervously. "We've run every test we can. There is no infection, no injury. The boy is physically fine. Sometimes children cry when they feel something no medicine can solve." Omar's eyes darkened. "And what am I supposed to do with that answer? My son has been crying for 12 hours. You're telling me you don't know why?" The doctor bowed his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Farid. We'll continue to observe him." Then he slipped out, leaving Omar drowning in silence broken only by his son's sobs. For the first time in years, Omar felt powerless. Money could buy the best specialists in the world, yet none of them could quiet the storm in his son's chest. He buried his face in his hands, ashamed of the tears burning behind his own eyes. That was when he heard a voice behind him. "Sometimes," it said gently, "a child does not need silence. He needs someone to hear his pain." Omar turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was a woman he had never seen before. She was tall, with skin the deep shade of polished ebony, and eyes that carried both strength and sorrow. She wore the plain uniform of a hospital cleaner, a bucket of supplies in her hand. "This is not your place," Omar said, his tone clipped, defensive. He was a man used to control, and the intrusion struck him as unacceptable. But the woman did not flinch. She set the bucket aside and stepped into the room, her gaze fixed not on Omar but on Amir. "I know that cry," she said softly. "It is the cry of a heart that has lost its balance." Omar stared, torn between anger and desperation. "You think you know my son better than his doctors?" "No," she replied simply. "But I know grief. And grief can live in even the smallest of bodies." The words unsettled him. He had dismissed countless people before, politicians, rivals, even family members, but something about her voice rooted him to the floor. She wasn't asking for permission, she was speaking truth. "Who are you?" Omar asked finally, his voice lower. "My name is Amina," she said. "I came here from Kenya. My child, he used to cry like this. The doctors called it many things, but I knew it was his spirit crying, not his body. Omar's throat tightened. He wanted to reject her, to send her away, but Amir's cries grew sharper, as if in response to the tension. His son's small hand reached outward, trembling in the air, searching for comfort that Omar could not give. Amina's eyes softened. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the boy. Every instinct in Omar told him to refuse. He didn't let strangers near his child, not bodyguards, not even distant relatives. But something broke inside him at that moment. His empire couldn't help him, his wealth couldn't help him, and this woman, this stranger, seemed to hold a piece of the answer he had been begging for. Slowly, Omar nodded. Amina walked to the bedside and knelt down, her hands steady as she brushed Amir's damp hair from his forehead. She whispered something in Swahili, words Omar did not understand, but their rhythm carried a calmness that filled the room. Amir's cries softened, just slightly at first, then faded into small hiccups. His tiny chest rose and fell more evenly, his body relaxing against the pillow. Omar watched in stunned silence. It was as if his son had recognized her voice, as if her presence had unlocked something no doctor, no machine, no medicine could touch. What did you say to him?" Omar asked, his own voice barely more than a whisper. Amina looked up at him, her gaze unflinching. "I told him he is not alone. That his pain is seen. That someone is listening." Omar's breath caught. For a man who had built his life on power, on numbers and contracts and results, the simplicity of her answer hit him harder than any boardroom defeat ever had. And for the first time that night, Omar Al-Farid had no words. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of the hospital, turning the floor into a sea of gold. Omar had not slept. He sat by Amir's bed, watching his son breathe peacefully at last. The relentless crying that had tormented them for hours was gone, replaced by soft sighs of rest. Every time Omar glanced at the boy's face, his chest loosened just slightly. But then his eyes shifted toward the memory of Amina. She had left quietly after soothing Amir, picking up her bucket and disappearing into the maze of white corridors. Omar had wanted to stop her, to ask more questions, but the words had caught in his throat. A billionaire Arab executive, the man who negotiated with kings and ministers, had been left speechless by a hospital cleaner from Kenya. When the doctors came in that morning, their confidence was fragile. "It seems the boy is calmed," one said, flipping through a clipboard. "Sometimes rest arrives on its own." Omar's eyes narrowed. He wanted to tell them the truth, to point out that it wasn't on its own. But what would he say? That a stranger had whispered foreign words into his son's ear and accomplished what medicine could not? He remained silent, but inside, something unsettled was stirring. Later that afternoon, Omar stepped out into the hallway for the first time since Amir had fallen asleep. The sterile air was filled with the sharp scent of disinfectant, the echo of hurried footsteps, and the quiet hum of machines hidden behind closed doors. He turned a corner, and there she was. Amina, mop in hand, working slowly, her face calm despite the weight she carried in her eyes. He hesitated before approaching. "You," he said, his voice firmer than he intended. She looked up, startled at first, then composed herself. "Mr. Al-Farid." Omar studied her. She was younger than he had thought the night before, perhaps in her mid-30s. Lines of exhaustion marked her face, yet her posture was steady, dignified, almost regal in its own quiet way. "My son," Omar began, his tone low, "he slept for the first time because of you." "How?" Amina set the mop aside, her hands clasped in front of her. "Children sense more than adults believe. Amir has carried something heavy in his little heart. I only gave him permission to release it." "Permission?" Omar repeated, incredulous. "He is a child. What weight could he possibly carry?" Amina tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Sometimes children carry what their parents do not speak, what they feel but hide." The word struck him like a hidden blade. Omar stiffened, his face hardening. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "I am saying nothing," Amina replied calmly. "I only listen." Her restraint disarmed him. He expected defensiveness, excuses, but instead she gave him silence, and in that silence, Omar felt his anger turn inward. He thought of the past months, The endless late nights at the office, the pressure of international deals, the quiet arguments at home. Amir had been watching, absorbing, feeling everything Omar thought he had concealed. For the first time, Omar questioned whether his empire was costing him something greater than money. Still, pride fought to the surface. "You are a cleaner," he said bluntly. "How do you know such things?" Her eyes flickered with pain, but she did not flinch. "I was a mother once. I lost my son in Nairobi." He cried like a mere, non-stop, inconsolable, until one day he stopped. And the silence, her voice trailed off, her lips tightening. I would give anything to hear him cry again. Omar's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The grief in her tone was too raw, too unpolished to be anything but truth. At that moment, the automatic doors at the end of the corridor slid open. Two men in suits, Omar's aides, strode in, their expressions tense. "Sir, we need to discuss the Riyadh contract immediately," one said, ignoring Amina entirely. Omar glanced at them, then back at her. For the first time in years, he chose not to answer his aides. Instead, he looked directly into Amina's eyes. "Come back tonight," he said. "When Amir wakes." Amina hesitated, then nodded once, quietly returning to her work. That evening, Omar waited by Amir's bedside, restless. His son stirred, whimpering softly. The old cries threatened to return, sharp and piercing, but then the door opened. Amina stepped in quietly, her uniform freshly washed, her hands folded in front of her. Without hesitation, she knelt by the bed. She spoke again in Swahili, her voice low, melodic. Amir's cries stilled almost instantly, his small hand reaching toward her. Omar watched in astonishment as his son clung to the woman as though he had known her all his life. For the first time in his career, Omar didn't care about appearances. He didn't care that a stranger had done what he couldn't. All he cared about was the peace settling over his son's face. After a long silence, Omar spoke softly. "Amina, what did you say to him just now?" She looked up at him. "I told him that his father's heart beats louder than his fears. But he needs to hear it from you." The words cut deep, sharper than any accusation. Omar realized that in all his years of building empires, he had never once told his son such things. He had thought gifts and comfort were enough. But maybe what Amir needed was something his fortune couldn't buy. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him. He looked at Amina and saw not a cleaner, not a stranger, but a woman who carried scars that gave her wisdom he desperately lacked. And as Amir drifted back into sleep, Omar knew that his life, his priorities, his empire, were about to change. But change never comes without resistance. And outside that hospital room, forces were already gathering, waiting to test just how far this billionaire would go when stripped of the armor of wealth. For 2 nights in a row, Amir slept peacefully when Amina was near. She spoke to him in soft tones, words Omar couldn't understand but felt resonate in the air like a bomb. Each time, the child's cries slowed, then ceased, replaced by quiet breaths that carried the promise of healing. Omar stayed beside the bed, watching with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Gratitude, because his son had found rest. Unease, because it unsettled him to realize that all his power, all his money, had been eclipsed by the presence of a woman society often overlooked. On the 3rd day, as Amina quietly left the hospital room, Omar's aides approached him in the corridor. The men wore tailored suits and impatience in their eyes. "Sir," said Khalid, the eldest aide, "word has spread. People are asking why a cleaning woman is allowed inside your private suite." "She is helping my son," Omar replied simply. "Helping?" Khalid scoffed. "Mr. Al-Farid, with all due respect, the board is watching. Investors are nervous already because of your absence at the Riyadh summit. And now rumors say a stranger comforts your child instead of doctors. It makes you appear," he hesitated, lowering his voice, "weak." The word landed like a strike. Omar's jaw tightened. For years, strength had been his armor, his reputation, his legacy. To admit weakness was to hand victory to rivals waiting in the shadows. But when he looked back through the glass panel at Amir sleeping peacefully, the old definitions of power suddenly felt hollow. My son does not need investors, Omar said coldly. He needs peace. Peace, Khalid muttered, exchanging a look with the other aide. What about dignity? What about control? This woman could exploit you. We know nothing about her. Omar turned sharply, his eyes like steel. Then find out. Investigate her if you must. But until you can calm my child's tears, Amina stays. The aides fell silent, bowing slightly before retreating. Omar knew the matter was far from closed. Power circles in Dubai thrived on whispers, and whispers could become storms. That evening, Amina returned. She entered without hesitation, her face calm, though Omar noticed her eyes flick briefly to the security cameras overhead. She knew people were watching. How is he today? She asked gently. Better, Omar admitted. Because of you. Amina smiled faintly, kneeling beside Amir once again. The boy stirred, reached for her hand and clung to it. Omar's chest ached at the sight. You have a gift, Omar said, his voice low. No, she replied. I have pain. And pain, when it is shared, becomes wisdom. Her words lingered in the room like incense. Omar found himself studying her face, the strength in her posture, the way grief seemed to live in her but not consume her. For years, he had surrounded himself with wealth, with advisors, with men who measured success in numbers. Yet here was a woman with nothing, offering him the most valuable thing he had ever received, the peace of his child. But peace rarely lasts long in a world built on pride. The next morning, Omar's sister, Layla, arrived unannounced. She swept into the room in a swirl of silk and perfume, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. Omar, what is this nonsense I hear? A cleaner? A stranger? Her eyes darted to Amina, who stood quietly in the corner, bucket in hand. This is an insult to our family's name. Lower your voice, Omar said, his tone calm but firm. Amir is resting. Layla ignored him. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. You bring someone like her into this room? Into our circle? People are already questioning your judgment. What will they say when they see this? She gestured toward Amina with disdain. Omar rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. They will say that my son sleeps again. That is all that matters. Layla's lips tightened. You think love for your son excuses weakness? You risk everything. The board, the press, everyone is watching. Omar's eyes hardened. Let them watch. Let them see a father who will burn his empire to protect his child. The silence that followed was heavy. Layla's face flushed, her anger masked by a brittle smile. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out, her perfume lingering in the sterile air. When she was gone, Amina spoke softly. She fears what she does not understand. Omar exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. And you? Do you fear me? Amina met his gaze steadily. I fear nothing anymore. Not after burying my child. The raw honesty in her words struck Omar harder than his sister's accusations. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. But later that night, as he sat alone beside Amir, he knew the battle was only beginning. Amina had calmed his son, yes. But her presence had stirred something else entirely: envy, suspicion, threats to the delicate balance of power he had built his life upon. And in a world where appearances ruled, Omar wondered how long he could protect both his child's peace and the woman who had given it. Omar Al-Farid was no stranger to scrutiny. In boardrooms across Dubai and beyond, he had been praised, feared, and envied. But never questioned. Until now. By the end of the week, whispers about the mysterious woman in the hospital had grown into something louder. Board members called incessantly, journalists hovered outside the gates of his estate, and investors demanded explanations. A billionaire executive could survive scandals of money, politics, even betrayal, but sentimentality? Vulnerability? That was dangerous. Inside the hospital, however, none of that mattered. Omar's world had narrowed to the small room where Amir slept, where the boy's fragile body clung to recovery, and where Amina's voice seemed to carry a healing no doctor could replicate. But the walls were closing in. One evening, just as the call to prayer echoed faintly through the city, Omar met with his closest advisors in a private lounge of the hospital. The men sat in a tight circle, their faces tense. Khalid, his senior aide, leaned forward, voice sharp. "Sir, your silence is costing us millions. Riyadh is pulling out of negotiations. Paris investors are threatening to withdraw unless you appear publicly." "I told you," Omar replied evenly, "my son comes first." "Of course," Khalid said carefully. "But with respect, perception matters. You are the empire, and empires do not bend for the cries of a child, nor for the whispers of a cleaning woman." The last word stung. Omar's hand clenched into a fist, resting on the arm of his chair. "Her name is Amina," he said coldly. "And without her, my son would still be screaming through the night." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak, but Omar saw it in their eyes. Disbelief, judgment, the calculation of men who weighed everything on scales of profit and loss. When he dismissed them, Omar remained seated long after they left, staring at the skyline. For the first time, he felt the precariousness of his throne. Not from enemies abroad, but from the battle within, between pride and love, between empire and family. Later that night, Omar returned to Amir's room. The boy stirred fitfully, his tiny hands clutching the blanket. Amina sat by his side, humming softly in Swahili, her hand resting gently on the child's. The melody was unfamiliar, but its effect was undeniable. Amir's breathing slowed, his body relaxed, the storm inside him quieting once more. Omar stood at the doorway, watching, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Relief, gratitude, and fear. Fear of how far he was willing to go to protect what this woman brought into his son's life. When she noticed him, Amina rose quietly, dipping her head in respect. "He is calmer now." Omar stepped closer, his eyes lingering on Amir before shifting to her. "What do you say to him?" She hesitated, then answered simply. "I remind him he is loved, that he is not alone. Sometimes that is all a child needs." Omar's throat tightened. "And what about me? What do I need?" For a moment, her gaze locked with his, unflinching. "You need to believe the same thing." The words struck him harder than any boardroom negotiation. He turned away, pacing toward the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. For all his wealth, for all his power, was he truly alone? Had he built towers so high that even his own heart was unreachable? The next morning, the storm broke. A leading newspaper splashed a headline across its front page: "Arab Executive's Empire Crumbles as He Leans on Unknown Woman." The article was filled with speculation about Amina's identity, about Omar's irrational choices, about investors fleeing his empire. The photo accompanying it showed Omar leaving the hospital wing, Amina visible just behind him. By noon, his phone was ablaze with calls. Rivals seized the opportunity, circling like vultures. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Even family members sent scathing messages, accusing him of dishonoring the Al-Farid name. But Omar ignored them all. He went to Amir's room, shut the door, and sat with his son. The world outside could roar and crumble, but in here, the boy's fragile peace mattered more. Still, the weight of the storm pressed down. That night, when Amina returned, Omar's composure cracked. "They want me to send you away," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse. Amina's brow furrowed. "Who?" "Everyone. My board, my family, the press. They say you make me look weak." Amina regarded him quietly, then stepped closer. "And what do you say?" Omar met her gaze, his chest burning. "I say my son needs you." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. For the first time, Omar felt the pull of something beyond gratitude, something deeper, more dangerous. But before he could speak further, Amir stirred. His small voice cracked through the silence. "Baba?" Omar rushed to his side, taking his hand. "I'm here, sir. I'm here." The boy's eyes, half-lidded with exhaustion, flicked toward Amina. "Don't let her go." Omar froze, the weight of the child's plea crushing him. He looked back at Amina, who stood silently, her eyes shimmering with something between sorrow and strength. And in that moment, Omar realized the truth. His empire, his reputation, his billions, They were fragile thrones. But this connection, this healing, this fragile thread tying his son's heart to Amina's presence, this was real. Yet reality came with a cost. And Omar knew the storm outside was far from over. The storm outside Omar's empire had reached its peak. Headlines screamed betrayal, board members abandoned him, and even his closest advisors urged him to distance himself from Amina. But Omar no longer measured his life by contracts or stock prices. His measure was simpler, the sound of his son's laughter returning after nights of silence. And that laughter came only when Amina was near. The hospital corridors felt different that night. Quieter, heavier. The news had spread. Omar Al-Farid, once untouchable, was losing everything. Rivals circled like sharks, waiting for him to drown. But none of that mattered when he stepped into Amir's room and saw his boy asleep, one small hand wrapped around Amina's fingers. She looked up at him, exhaustion written across her face. "He fought sleep," she said softly. "But then he whispered your name. That gave him peace." Omar's chest tightened. For months he had chased peace in boardrooms, in wealth, in power. But here it was, resting in the trust of a child and the quiet strength of a woman who had nothing yet gave everything. He sat beside the bed, lowering his voice. "They're going to take everything from me." Amina studied him with steady eyes. "And what will you still have?" Omar turned his gaze toward Amir, then back at her. "Him. And perhaps you." For the first time, Amina's expression wavered. She pulled her hand gently from Amir's grasp, standing slowly. "You don't owe me anything, Omar. You have already given me something I thought I'd lost forever, the chance to comfort a child again. That is enough." But Omar shook his head. "No, it is not enough. My empire was built on walls so high I forgot how to climb down. You reminded me. You showed me what matters." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. The next morning, the world seemed to close in. Cameras crowded outside the hospital, reporters shouted accusations, and security scrambled to contain the chaos. Khalid entered the room, his face grim. "Sir, the board has voted. They want your resignation. Effective immediately." Omar didn't flinch. "Let them have it." Khalid blinked. "You can't mean." "I do," Omar interrupted, his voice calm, resolute. "My empire without my son's peace is nothing. Without truth it is ash. I will not sacrifice him, or her, for numbers on a ledger." For the first time in years, Omar felt free. That evening, when the corridors emptied and the city lights shimmered against the hospital windows, Omar made his choice. He asked Amina to walk with him to the rooftop garden, a rare pocket of quiet above the chaos. The air was cooler there, the night sky stretched endless and unbroken. He turned to her, his voice trembling despite his usual composure. "You gave me back my son. But you also gave me back myself. I don't know what tomorrow holds, whether I will rise again or be forgotten. But tonight I need you to know, you are part of us now. Not as a stranger. As family." Amina's breath caught. She looked away, her hands clasped tightly. "Family is what I lost," she whispered. "I promised myself I would never open that door again. It hurts too much." Omar stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow across her, but his voice was tender. "Then let me carry some of that pain with you. You don't have to do it alone anymore." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rushing past the rooftop. Then, slowly, Amina met his gaze. Tears glistened in her eyes, not of weakness, but of release. "You don't know what you're asking," she said softly. "Yes, I do," Omar replied. "I'm asking for truth, for courage, for the kind of strength no empire can buy." Her lips trembled, and at last she nodded. Downstairs, Amir stirred in his sleep, murmuring faintly. When Omar and Amina returned to the room, the boy blinked up at them, his small hand reaching out. Not for one or the other, but for both. Omar took one side, Amina the other. Amir's hand rested between theirs, and for the first time since this ordeal began, his face broke into a tired but genuine smile. And in that fragile smile, Omar saw more wealth than he had ever counted, more power than he had ever wielded. The empire could crumble, the world could judge, rivals could circle, but none of it mattered. Because what truly remained was this: a child's peace, a woman's resilience, and a man finally brave enough to lay down his pride for love. As the night deepened, Omar whispered a prayer under his breath, not for riches, not for triumph, but for strength to protect what had been given to him. And for the first time, he felt that God might actually be listening. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that true power isn't measured by wealth, but by the courage to love and protect what matters most.